Hi, I'm Stephen O'Grady. I'm here for another RedMonk conversation. Today, we're going to be looking at the intersection of application development and databases in 2021. Where are we today? Where are the trends? And what are the trends going to be to shape the year ahead? And with me is Ed from DataStax. Ed, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Ed Anuff. I'm the Chief Product Officer of DataStax. I've been here for a little over a year now, but I've been working with Cassandra for over a decade now. So very familiar with all of the issues around how people run and use data at scale, and really excited to be solving a lot of those things at DataStax.
Excellent. Now, so let's, I mentioned the intersection of application development and databases. So let's start with the app dev part. So one of the things we're seeing a lot of interest in at RedMonk is, essentially consolidation of the app dev and this common app dev platform that we see is Kubernetes, in part because it's seen as offering platform independence, the ability to move between, sort of different clouds and on and off-prem platforms. There are a lot of other app dev trends that we're seeing sort of in the year ahead. What's top of mind for you folks? What's top of mind for DataStax?
So, it's really interesting. A lot of what we've seen over the last, say, 5 years or so has been that we've been taking a lot of the ideas that people have discovered through trial and error. What are the best ways to build applications? If we look at things like 12-factor apps, if we go and look at elastic scalability, we can see that things like Kubernetes are really the descendants, part of the lineage of the ideas that you saw with the platforms as a service, that you saw. It was the dynos of Heroku that led to through what they and other people were doing in the platform service space, led to things formalized around containerization as this concept of how we package and deploy, and then Kubernetes really brought that into being a standard control plane that could be leveraged in a lot of different scenarios, and was a framework in and of itself that could be extended so that Kubernetes could be essentially the platform of platforms. So it very much has been app dev, the ways that developers have been building applications that drove everything that we're talking about right now with this whole Kubernetes transformation. Same thing's been happening with data. So what we've seen has been that the NoSQL databases provided a way to think about and interact with, store, query, leverage my data in a way that was better aligned with how I build my application than perhaps the previous generation of relational databases. And so, these were two different aspects of how the application stack was being transformed, along with a few other things like the front end tier was being reinvented with single page apps and mobile. But you ended up with sort of this, if you now zoom out, you have sort of this end-to-end new stack for building applications, where what's super important for us today is like, okay, each one of these has been evolving independently. We now need to bring it back into a common platform. And that's been the challenge that Kubernetes has had to step up to really over the last 2 years, and has been, on the part of, for example, us at DataStax, has been trying to shepherd Cassandra to live within this, platform stack concept. If you look at how most of these architectures are built, they are done through modern APIs, microservices, and so you're seeing a lot of work around that. At DataStax, we've done that with an open source project that we call Stargate. That's about exposing data as APIs and microservices for Cassandra users. You're seeing a lot of activity around this for other types of data infrastructure as well.
So going back to the app dev side for a moment, one of the fastest growing that are called the data space, from RedMonk's perspective, is streaming. Right, this is not new. Streaming's been with us for a while. but it continues to just take off, sort of like a rocket. And heading into 2021, it seems pretty clear that this is going to be a fundamental component of sort of most data strategies. So what's the DataStax take here? What's the outlook look like?
Well, we think that streaming is super important. We see that all of the types of things that drive people to go and say that Cassandra is the right database for them, which is that they need to be able to deal with users and data around the world. They need to be able to go and make it highly available, highly scalable. Build a multitude of applications on top of it. All of these things are common to the streaming space, and again, when you go and look at the architectures that Cassandra users are building, you see streaming next to it. You'll see it next to NoSQL pretty much all the time, and so our goal there is to go and figure out how to go and solve streaming problems in the same way for the same types of users that we solved database problems for. And so we've looked at what's been going on within streaming. We found that most folks are using one of two major open source projects, either Kafka or Pulsar. A lot of folks are using Kafka. You hear about that probably the most these days. But we looked really closely at the problem. We saw that Pulsar was designed for use within Kubernetes. It's been where most of the work has happened in there. It's got the best story around geographical distribution. It's able to go and handle the throughput and performance and scale scenarios that we're seeing, and it has a better extension expansion model for being able to go and actually use it as a platform, so you can build things like analytics and stream processing directly on top of it. So those are a lot of things we liked about it. We're going to be doing a lot more with it. We're introducing a couple of new products built on top of it, so that enterprises that want to get support can do that, and developers who want to use it in the cloud will be able to do that as well. But I think the important piece is that if you're a developer or you're an architect, and you're looking at these situations where you're dealing with large amounts of data in motion, whether, as I said, whether it's an application that you're building, maybe a mobile app that's being used by people around the world, whether you're building a high throughput website, or really almost any of these situations, it's important to go and figure out how does streaming tie into it, but also be aware that you want to make sure that you're choosing a streaming architecture that doesn't have sort of an impedance mismatch, either from a development standpoint or an operational standpoint with the other pieces of your data infrastructure. And that's why we're looking and saying, okay, we think that Cassandra and Pulsar are the two things that should be used in conjunction.
Okay, so lastly here, we'd be remiss if we're talking about sort of database and app dev trends and sort of any intersection they're in 2021, and didn't bring up open source. Specifically on the database side, there have been a number of providers that have moved away, from open source, towards more proprietary and protectionist, sort of my word, license choices there. We have strong opinions on this at RedMonk, namely that anybody who writes the code, does get to sort of pick whatever terms they want, but that the sort of frequent practice of, these licenses blurring lines between proprietary and open source and implying the things that are not open source is, potentially unhelpful for open source more broadly. But I'm curious, from the DataStax perspective, what is the sort of attitude about open source, and sort of where do you see it fitting into, the strategy, in 2021 and beyond?
Well, look, the company DataStax was built upon, providing enterprises with, a supported long-term, reliable, certified, hardened distribution of Apache Cassandra. That's where we came from. I think more broadly speaking, when we think about open source, the thing that I would say is first and foremost is, um, if you're building open source like we are, uh, for the purposes of helping people out, helping developers, users to be successful with it, you really need to go and look at what's their perspective. And in almost any aspect of infrastructure, there's a lot of choice out there. And so almost by definition, anybody who's talking, to us, anybody who's talking to me about, why should I be using DataStax? But I think this is pretty true, looking across most of the folks in the open source, open core industry. Most of the users who are coming to us, they developers, architects, technologists, they're looking and saying, I don't want to be locked in. And that's why I'm looking at this option. If I didn't care about being locked in, I would be using some proprietary that I could only get from a cloud vendor. So I personally take really seriously why our users are here. Why are developers building on top of us? And foundationally, again, it's because they were looking for, choice. They were looking for zero lock-in. It was and as a developer, that's something I respect. That's something for the technologies I would build on that I would look at. And so that's the question I always ask when I see the different things that come up. I think we all understand why, from a business standpoint, these licenses are necessary. I'm not going to fault any of these other companies. They all have to make their own choices, and we are in a space where open source companies can end up in a situation where they do a whole bunch of work and somebody else comes and gets swoops in and gets the business value for it. But ultimately, we're delivering our technology because people are looking for an open solution. That's why they started here. And so we try to be respectful and focus on that.
Makes perfect sense to me. And with that, let's wrap up. Ed, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you.